Hello, I'm Molly. I'm a licensed insolvency practitioner at Parker Walsh. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about personal risk to the directors in a liquidation scenario. Now, this is one of the most common factors that directors are concerned about. Their company is insolvent, they've been struggling to pay the creditors. They're speaking with an insolvency practitioner with a view to the company going into liquidation, but in the back of their mind, they're concerned about whether or not they're going to owe money to the company or to the liquidator. And sometimes people can be hesitant in explaining these concerns to the insolvency practitioner or to the liquidator. They just think maybe that the liquidator is out for all the money they can possibly get, and if you express a concern, they'll jump on that, and then all of a sudden you do owe money, which isn't the case. So it is important to be open and transparent with the insolvency practitioner, or if they've been appointed the liquidator. If you're unhappy with your insolvency practitioner and you feel as if you can't talk to them, either you don't trust them or you think that they're not going to understand or they're not helping you, essentially get a different insolvency practitioner, come to someone like me. It's important that you understand your position as a director, but also personally as well. You don't want any nasty surprises down the line. So it's important that you confide in your insolvency practitioner and say what your concerns are. It could be specifically, I took this money out at this point in time to pay for this. Is that okay? So no point worrying about it. Ask your insolvency practitioner. They'll be able to confirm, yep, that's absolutely fine. Can't see an issue with it. Or they could say, it wasn't done correctly. Let's look at what we need to do to remedy it. But what you don't want to do is put your head in the sand and hope that the liquidator doesn't find it. That just doesn't work for anyone. So be open and transparent with your insolvency practitioner. Well, how can you become personally liable if it's a limited company? So you can be if you've given personal guarantees to the creditors. They can rely upon that if the company enters into liquidation and they're not going to get a full dividend back. So if you've given a personal guarantee, or if you have an overdrawn director's loan account, and essentially that is where you owe money to the company. It's just a loan. You've loaned money from the company and you owe it back. It will be in your accounts if you're not sure, or you could ask your accountant, or you could seek advice from an insolvency practitioner and they could look at the records to see if you do owe any money back. But those are quite common. There's not necessarily any misfeasance, any wrongdoing there. You've given a personal guarantee to the creditors. They may have asked for it at the time when it was a loan. It might have been a term that they weren't willing to budge on, so you had to give a personal guarantee. And with the overdrawn loan account, it is there. Directors commonly use it. It goes both ways. Sometimes the company can owe you money and vice versa. So those are the ways in which you could owe money in a liquidation scenario. The others are slightly more complicated, and these are the ones where directors aren't aware of what's happened and how they've owed money. But essentially, this is what's known as misfeasance or antecedent transactions. Now, directors, when they come to be, they've not been through a liquidation before and they've never heard these terms before. And essentially, it means misapplying money. You're a director, you're in charge of the company, you're in charge of the company funds, who gets paid what. And so with that level of responsibility, you have to make sure that you've dealt with that money correctly. And if you haven't, that might be classed as misfeasance or an antecedent transaction, and that's where it's not been done correctly. And because you were in charge of it, you owe the money back. So I'll give some examples as to how that could look in a practical term. So it could be that you had 4 creditors and you couldn't afford to pay them all. So you picked one that happens to be your brother and you pay him and you don't pay the other 3 and you've not got any more money. That's known as a preference payment. Essentially, you preferred your brother against all the other creditors. There was no reason for him to get all the money and the other 3 not to get any money at all. So you've preferred him. It is that can be a preference. Another example is a transaction at an undervalue. And essentially, that is where you've, say, got a company vehicle and you've done your online valuation and the vehicle's valued at £5,000, and your next door neighbour knocks on and says, I'll have that vehicle, I'll give you a tenner. And you think, oh, well, I really like my neighbour, he's been really good to me over the years, he's supported me, go on then, you can have it for a tenner. That's a transaction at an undervalue. You as a director should ensure that all assets are sold for a fair value. That's not a fair value. You knew it was worth £5,000 and you sold it for less than its value because you liked the neighbour. It doesn't quite work. So that again would be an antecedent transaction, and so you could be responsible for those transactions and owe money into the liquidation estate. You could also face disqualification depending on the severity of the transaction, the amount involved, who was harmed, etc. The Insolvency Service, which is a government body, could say, look, it's in the best interests of the creditors that you don't become a director again of another company. We can't risk you doing that transaction again. And so you become disqualified as a director. And you can't be involved in the formation, management or promotion of a limited company or a business in the future. And the terms between 2 to 15 years and will depend on the transaction. So those are things that you need to be careful of. So to avoid antecedent transactions or misfeasance, it's best to get in touch with someone like myself the minute you think the company is insolvent, the minute you're struggling to pay creditors, and you're not 100% sure the company's solvent or will return to profitability, get in touch with a licensed insolvency practitioner, because we can provide you with bespoke advice and let you know whether or not these transactions, whether or not you should be making them. It's ultimately your choice as a director, but we can give you more information about these and then you can make an educated decision. What you don't want to do is do the decision without knowing and just hope for the best. It doesn't quite work. It'll play on your mind. And if the company enters into liquidation down the line, you could be found liable for it. So it's best to make sure that you've got all the knowledge for making these decisions. So if you're insolvent, get in touch with someone like myself. So those are the antecedent transactions. And then there's wrongful trading, and this can be quite common. And basically, you as a director should know when the company is insolvent and it's not going to get any better. You're not going to be able to pay your creditors. And that's when you should take responsible action by seeking advice from an insolvency practitioner. And then we will advise you as to what route you should take for the company. You can't let the company continue to trade knowing that you're not going to return to profitability and you're making the position worse. It's not fair on your suppliers because they're trusting you as a director, thinking they're going to get paid. It's not fair on your employees. They're turning up for work every day, thinking they're going to get paid. And HMRC, appreciate you might not have any sympathy for them, but they're allowing you to accrue VAT, pay as you earn. And you're doing all this and you're in charge of your company and you know you're not going to be able to pay these people and it's getting worse. The company can't pay them, and that's wrongful trading, and that's when you can become liable. And again, you can face disqualification for that as well. So it's very important. The first signs of insolvency, get in touch with an insolvency practitioner. It might be that you don't need any services and you were maybe worrying for nothing, in which case, great. But then you've got the reassurance. Or it might be we can give you some tips, tell you how to trade. Again, I'd caveat that it's still your responsibility, but we can give you that guidance, or we could say, no, look, you're going to be personally liable, you need to stop now. And you'll be grateful for that advice because you don't want it to affect you personally. So wrongful trading is another area that you just need to be very careful of. I do see it, unfortunately. We give advice and the directors, I understand it, you have hope. It was when you set it up, you had all these aspirations for the company. You thought it was going to be a big success, and facing that reality is very, very difficult, and you want it to continue and you want it to be successful. And also you might have a close connection to the employees, they've been loyal, they're your friends, You don't want to have to make them redundant. And also the stigma of it. It's a big thing to say, look, the company's not worked. And so all these things keep you going. And I've seen it. But unfortunately, when they come back, when they've realised and they've said to me, I should have done this, say, a year ago. And you think, yes, you should have. And unfortunately, you now could be personally liable if you'd essentially, and sorry, it is quite blunt, but if you'd pulled the plug a year ago, you wouldn't have been personally liable. You would have put it into, say, liquidation, but you would have been protected individually. Now what we're saying is, yeah, it needs to go into liquidation, and to top it off, you're now personally liable. We need to look into that. So it is important to make sure you're taking advice when you need to. And then lastly, you can be personally liable if you've committed fraud. It's quite obvious. And fraud is where you've intentionally, you've acted fraudulently, you purposely took money away from creditors, you lied, you were deceitful, etc. That's fraud. It's criminal. You could be disqualified. You could be fined. You could owe money back. You could face prison, essentially. It is very, very serious. So those are the ways that you could become personally liable. But please be rest assured, when I speak to directors, they are concerned, and most of the time they're absolutely fine. They've been hesitant in wanting to say, but when they've actually said, look, I think I've done this, can you look into it? Most of the time it's absolutely fine. When it's not, we say, look, you shouldn't have done it. This is what you could face, but let's remedy it. Let's solve it. Let's put a strategy in place together so that you know what you're doing. And then they're not having sleepless nights because, yeah, they've not done it correctly, but at least they've got a strategy and they know. So I hope that's helped. If you've got any concerns, please get in touch. Okay, thank you.